Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you for your continued support of the library as well. It's such a privilege and a pleasure to be speaking with Sylvie Brieu tonight, and our ability to host brilliant authors such as Sylvie depends largely on your continued support. So thank you, truly. On to our wonderful speaker tonight. So Sylvie is an award-winning journalist and author. She's the author of 3 works which we see before us. Most recently, L'âme de l'Amérique, which we'll be discussing tonight, which looks at Montana as representative of the larger American mythology. A little bit more about this book. It was published in 2022 by Alban Michel. It hasn't been published in English yet, but if you know a publishing house or a translator who's interested, Sylvie would love to make that happen as well. About this book, so from the Rockies to the Great Plains, from behind the scenes in Yellowstone Park to the battlefield of Little Bighorn, Sylvie takes us on a captivating road trip through Montana, which she locates as the heart of Americana, in order to meet Native Americans, rodeo champions, authors, artists, and wildlife specialists. Their unconditional love for this exceptional environment, now under threat, fuels their sense of community and resilience. Sylvie, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the American Library in Paris. Thank you to Whitney, who introduced me, Whitney de Courcelles, who introduced me to the American Library in Paris a year ago or so. And it's such an honor to be here. And thank you for staying after this amazing cocktail we had. I was afraid nobody would stay. But thank you for staying, and I'm happy to share some of the stories about, anything you want me to share about. I don't know, I don't want to start first, so go ahead if you had any questions.
Well, let's set the scene first a little bit for those who aren't familiar with your work here. So you have a background in journalism, you worked for National Geographic for a very long time, and your first real reporting experience was in South America. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, that's a big part of my life. So I started studying, modern languages and international relations at the Sorbonne in Paris. And actually, as a kid, I wanted to learn American, not English. And my parents had a really hard time explaining that American was actually English. And my goal ever since had been to study in the US. So I studied first at the Sorbonne. I graduated from the Sorbonne, did a master's degree, then went to UC Berkeley. And there I studied journalism. And I took also a class in Maya hieroglyphics writing. And I think my strong interest for native worlds started there. And right after Berkeley, I came back to France, and my dream was already to work for National Geographic. And at the time, a few years after I came back, I heard that National Geographic was going to launch a French edition, and I was hired to be one of the founding members of National Geographic. So that was in 1999. And I spent 15 years at National Geographic. Then I worked in DC at National Geographic Society, and they used to have a leading program that promoted indigenous filmmakers and photographers worldwide. So I worked there for a while. And then at the same time, I initiated a multimedia project to go everywhere in the world and to promote voices of diversity. And that's how I ended up in South America.
And what did you do there?
In South America, the goal, I took a sabbatical from National Geographic, and the goal was to have no goals. The goal was to go there and to spend time with Native American communities and to take the time to try to see the world through their eyes. So it takes time, so it took me a year. So the goal was not to go all over South America, but to go wherever people would welcome me and would be willing to educate me about their culture. So I started in the Andes in Peru, and I spent time with the Quechua. And then doors open up in Chile with the Mapuche. So the Mapuche are the main indigenous group in Chile. And in Chile, I met a Rapa Nui from Easter Island. And he said, well, if you go to Easter Island and want to learn about the culture, you're welcome to stay with my family. So I spent some time in Easter Island, then went back to the continent, then crossed the border from Chile to Argentina by bus, and I ended up in the Amazon. And there I stayed with people whose life was threatened to death because they were trying to reforest the Amazon. And one of their leaders knew I was a journalist, and although I was not on assignment, he said, you know, I have things to say, so listen. So he sat in front of his house, and, well, not house, I don't know how you say it in English, gaz, you know, I mean,
His hut. Yeah.
hut. And he said, you have a camera, so sit down and film, I have things to say. And he said, basically, now you know what's going on, so you have a responsibility. So what I did right after that, I went to the headquarters of National Geographic in Washington, D.C., and I met one of the vice presidents, and I said, well, people share their stories. They say, now you know you have a responsibility. I'm sharing these stories with you. Now you know you have a responsibility. So what can we do? And he suggested I should write a book, which I did. So that's the first book, Quand s'élèvent nos voix, so when our voices rise. And the goal was to destigmatize indigenous people in South America and shine a spotlight on change makers and see how we could get some inspiration about the solutions they were finding, combining ancient wisdom and high tech to address contemporary issues such as climate change, discrimination, and so on and so forth.
I'm so struck by what you say about how this was very slow work, and it was based upon building these in-depth relationships with the people that you were working with, as opposed to treating them as kind of anthropological case studies, because I find that that's something that's really present in L'Âme de l'Amérique as well, this idea that you are not outside of the community observing it, but you are learning about the community by being in it. So how would you say that your travels and your work in South America, which, by the way, Sylvie did all of this alone. She was totally solo traveling, as the kids say, which is so impressive. How did that prepare the work that you went on to do in Montana?
Oh, so we have to go to Burma in between.
We've skipped Burma, excuse me.
It's a long way to
Take us to Burma.
So when I back from South America, I went to see UNESCO, and I told them, well, I explained what my goal was, to promote voices of diversity, to build bridges between culture, and they said that really fits our status. So they granted me their patronage, and I said, well, I'd like to do this work in different countries, and then at the time, Burma or Myanmar was opening up after 50 years of isolation and dictatorship. And there was a forum, an international forum in Rangoon, Yangon. I heard that women from different ethnic zones, they call them ethnic zones, were going to Rangoon to express not their feelings, but to talk about their struggles. So at that time, it was 2013, the West was getting really excited because Burma is really located in a strategic position between China and India, and it's being under embargo for many years. So the Europeans and the Americans were excited to be able to invest in Burma. And all this excitement was, because of this excitement, nobody was really realizing that wars were reactivated in the north of Myanmar, northern Myanmar, on the east of the country, and these women started sharing their stories, and I was struck by the gap between the reality we were shown, you know, like in Truman Show, where where what's his name, the actor Jim
Carrey.
Carrey. Yeah, he feels like, I mean, he realized he's being manipulated. That's the feeling I had. So I was seeing a reality, but I could hear another story.
And you were seeing this in the mainstream news, or where were you seeing this reality
Well,
being
in international
represented?
news, and things were getting better, that Burma was on the path to freedom and democracy, but at the same time wars were being reactivated. The Rohingya people who were deprived of their citizenship, and they are Muslim people, they were suffering for a genocide. Then later it was recognized as a genocide. But so I was struck by the differences of visions about the reality. So I asked the woman I was meeting, I said, well, I don't know what I can do if I write something that might put you in danger, but if we don't do anything, people will never know. So if you think, I wasn't thinking about a book, but if I come back, will you open the doors? Will you let me stay with you? Can I follow you? Can I see what you're doing? And the goal was not to victimize them, but to pay tribute to their courage and to the action, all the initiatives they were taking beyond ethnic divides to bring peace to their country. So I investigated during 3 years, so by myself, with no sponsors, because that was at a time also when people were distrusting the West, so the media, but also any international corporations. So, and also I didn't know what kind of results, what kind of accomplishment, what would be the results. So since I couldn't promise anything, I just decided to go because I just played by instinct. I had to go and I wanted to do something. So I did that during 3 years. And then I had to convince my publisher that it was a good book. And then he said, well, but nothing about the people from Myanmar, from all over Myanmar, has ever been published during this period of transition, so we don't have figures. So how can we know if it's going to sell or not? So then I had to convince I had exceptional access, which I had, because when you live with people for 3 years, obviously doors open. And also they obviously understood I wasn't doing it for money. So then the book was published.
And this seems like a through line across your work, this idea that you confront a narrative that is embraced by the dominant faction of society, and then you consider alternative narratives, alternative perspectives. So we see that in Burma, where you're resisting the story that's being told in other media outlets, that this is a time of peace and progress, and then we see it when we get to L'Âme de l'Amérique, where you're considering, on the one hand, and we'll talk about all this, but the kind of mythology of America, the idea that the heroic narrative that we have about America's past, and then on the other hand, the groups that have been oppressed by that history, Native American groups, we see environmental activists resisting these kind of grand narratives that are being proposed. So tell us about how you arrived then, finally, after taking a very long road through the Andes and through Easter Island and through Burma, what brought you finally to America?
So after Burma, because the experience was so intense and so difficult, because to be in touch with people who are suffering without being able to do anything about it, I felt the need to just reconnect to the land and to go. I've always been attracted to the American West. I mean, I studied at Berkeley. I spent a lot of time in New Mexico, in Arizona with the Navajo, the Hopi people. And so I knew that was a place for me. I mean, I knew there was a place for me to reconnect to the land somewhere in the American West, which is really big. But then I also had another desire, which was that after a lot of political turmoil, to say things in a subtle way, I felt like going to a place where I could still feel the heart of America a bit. I know that's ambitious, but what I did is that I just asked around my American friends and I said, where can I go to reconnect to the land, and is there a place in America where I could still feel the soul of America? So most of my friends didn't even answer my mails. They didn't even know what to say. But then
it's a big question.
It's
to
a
be
big
fair,
question.
it's a big ask.
I know, but I knew someone might have an answer, and the answer came from one of National Geographic legendary photographer whose name is William Albert Allard. And I don't know if some of you know him, but he's just an amazing photographer, and he has this deep knowledge of the American West because he spent maybe 50 years photographing the West. He's about 86 now, and he just sent me an email and he said, go to Montana. Montana is what America has best to offer. He said so, and I believed him. And he said, from the Rockies to the Great Plains, you will really experience what the true American West is.
We're using this term a lot, the true America, the soul of America, the American West, and these are big terms that I think we should define more concisely if we can, or we should consider why they might not be definable. But when we say American West, what do you mean by that?
West of the Mississippi.
That's a good start.
Which is really big.
Yeah.
So then, when he said that, I posted on social networks, and I asked my American friends, I said, does anybody know someone in Montana? Because I wanted to have like an entry point. And most of them say, Montana, why do you want to go to Montana? It's a remote place, you know, people have lots of guns. And I said, well, it's still called the last best place. So, I mean, there must be something about it. And then finally a friend of mine said, I met him through chocolate because I have a love affair with chocolate. But anyway, so that comes, that's another story. Well, I worked 6 months on an assignment about chocolate for National Geographic. And anyway, so I met this guy in the Ecuadorian Amazon, and this guy, who's an American living in Chile, making chocolate, says, I have a friend in Montana who has a ranch. So I said, okay. So he said, I can put you in touch with him. So we Skyped, and through Skype, the guy started saying, oh, Montana is a great place. And, you know, and he started telling me about all these historical landmarks you had in Montana. So he started telling me about the Lewis and Clark expedition. And he started telling me about Little Bighorn battlefield, and he started telling me also about Yellowstone National Park. Although most of Yellowstone National Park is in Wyoming, the northern entrance that was inaugurated by Theodore Roosevelt is in Montana.
Wow. I mean, it's fascinating. As I was doing research and as I was reading your book and preparing for this, when you realize the quantity of American history that is concentrated in Montana, it's incredible. It's unbelievable. Can you tell us a bit more about Montana's place in the construction of the American legend?
How many hours do we have? That's a big topic. But something I wanted to say, I mean, I cannot answer like the whole question, but so, I mean, about the relationship between Montana and French, because we're in a place here where you work, you do a really wonderful job in promoting French-American friendship, and in Montana, there's still a connection to France. In 1803, Montana was part of France. I know, I found that out. And Napoleon sold the big Louisiana, which Montana was part of. At the time, it wasn't Montana, but he sold it to Thomas Jefferson. But Jefferson was president? Okay, but you agree he sold it? Yeah, so he sold it, and then Jefferson asked one captain, but then there were two, Lewis and Clark, to lead an expedition to evaluate what was out there. So Native American tribes, fauna, flora, and it took them 2 years, and it's part really of the mythology and of the identity. Yeah.
And then we get from that to cowboys, right? And it's all based on this relationship to the vastness of the land, to the size of it, and to this connection with the land. And you said something in your book that I was quite struck by. You described the importance of the notion of frontiers, or frontières, to American identity. Can you explain the sort of frontier theory to us?
Oh my God, that's tricky with so many Americans in the room.
We won't be offended, I promise.
Well, I don't know if I can answer that, but what I wanted to add regarding, so we had Lewis and Clark, and about the landmarks, you know, and it comes to the frontier also. And so this guy, Daniel, when I talked to him on Skype, he got all excited about these historical landmarks, Lewis and Clark, Little Bighorn in 1876, and Little Bighorn, who, for those who don't remember, it's a coalition of Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Sioux, who won a battle over General Custer, who was a hero in the country, and it was a big trauma. Anyway, and after that victory, it was decided to get rid of the Indian problem. And then after that, 1890 was the Wounded Knee Massacre, and it was the end of the Indian Wars and the end of the conquest of the West.
And you had quite direct access to the living legacy of this violent history in your time in Montana because you were working largely with Native American communities. Can you tell us a bit about your experience with these communities and what they taught you about their version of American history?
So as soon as I arrived in Montana, doors really opened quickly, and so teepee doors, ranch doors, rangers' doors in Yellowstone National Park, and it was just amazing. That was the first year, the first summer I spent in Montana, and Montana is also known, although there are there are about 1 million people, it's known to be, thanks to the Los Angeles Times, who gave Montana the nickname of the literary capital of America, because there are so many writers per square meters. And there's a community called Livingstone, and in Livingstone there's Bob Dattila. Bob Dattila was the literary agent of Jim Harrison, and he's part of the community I spend my summers with. And he said, "Oh my God, people are opening their doors, their teepee doors, their ranch doors, and I've been living here for 40 years, and I didn't even get to camp with the crows. And how do you do that? You should write a book." So I said, well, I'm not going to write a book about people welcoming me. But I was thinking, yeah, but there's something I want to dig in. So I kept coming every summer. And then I found what I wanted to write about. And I tell you later. But the thing is, the first year I was there, I was invited by the Crow people to camp near Little Bighorn battlefield. It's 5 minutes away from it, on their agency. And every year they organize what they call Crow Fair, which is one of the biggest power in the United States. And they gather family, clans. They also welcome their old enemies, the Northern Cheyenne and the Blackfeet, but they're mostly Crow, and there are about 1,500 teepees, white teepees, most of them. They set them near Little Bighorn battlefield. So I get to camp with Angela and her family. They're mostly women, and they're all really well-educated women. Angela used to be the judge of the tribe, and she's still a lawyer. And her niece is a pioneer in bilingual education, Crow and English. Another of her niece is a lawyer that fight for water rights for indigenous tribes, not just in Montana, but also in New Mexico and Arizona. So I got to camp with them, and then I went to the Rockies, to the Blackfeet, and the Blackfeet live near Glacier National Park. And I was adopted by a family, Darnell and Smokey, right at the door, and they're both spiritual leaders. They're keeper of the Thunder Pipe, which is the highest level of spirituality in their community. And they told me to make a comparison, to make me understand how important their title was, that it's the equivalent in the Catholic Church, they told me, of the Pope, which is like really high position. And but then, you know, so people welcome me.
So you were camping with the Pope?
No, I didn't. I actually don't camp with them. I just go and visit them. I just camp in teepees when Crow Fair is happening, because Native Americans don't live in teepees anymore, but they camp for this specific occasion in teepees.
And so then you're working with Native American tribes, and they're telling you this kind of alternative history in regards to Little Bighorn and Lewis and Clark and everything with that. And then another sort of counter-narrative or form of resistance that you're encountering in Montana is the environmental activism movement. Can you tell us a bit about your experience with this as you were traveling across Montana?
What really interested me in Montana was, I mean, of course, there are different narratives. So when I'm talking about my vision of Montana, is the vision. I mean, I keep coming to Montana every summer. I spend my summers in Montana. I don't want to go in winter. It's too cold.
It's a little cold.
Yeah, but summer, it's when people gather. It's about social gathering. It's about ceremonies. It's about, you know, you are able to hike and to go to barbecues and socialize with a lot of people. So I go in summers, and I've been going to Montana every summer for the past 7 years. And what really struck me the first time I was there was the people I spent time with, whether they were Native Americans or non-Native Americans, the deep connection they have to the land, and how their unconditional love for the land shaped their strong sense of resilience and community and solidarity. And that goes beyond political divides. So whether there are Democrats or Republicans, they have a common ground, which is the love for the land.
And these political divides do really exist in Montana as well. And we've spoken about this before, the idea that that Montana is the spot of the sort of convergence of a lot of different political identities. So you have these environmental activists, you have this large Native American population, a large part of which is living in poverty because they haven't been supported by the government in any means. And then you also have this very deep conservative contingent, and then you have these new waves moving in from cities like San Francisco or Los Angeles, where they've been priced out. They're seeking, wide open spaces to work from home, what have you. And so you had Montana at the start of America, which is when all roads led to Montana, and then now you find all these identities there again. So what is the political scene in Montana today? How are they voting, and how are these different communities interacting?
So when I first got there, people were saying that Montana was a purple state, meaning that nationally they were voting for the Republicans, but sometimes at a governor level, they would vote a Democrat. Last election, it was all red. And as you said, there are new waves of migrations, and the balance people have managed to find between old enemies, Native Americans and descendants of cowboys, is fragilized by new waves of migrants coming. So there are different waves of migrants. So people who have money and who are fleeing San Francisco, the Silicon Valley, because it's getting too expensive and they want to buy big ranches in Montana. But people from Montana don't see that, in a positive way, because it's they just spend 2 weeks a year, for instance, in Montana, meaning they buy the ranch, then they leave, so they take no part in the community life. And then there are people who come to Montana for political reasons, and these people, they settle in some pockets of Montana, and they are white supremacists, and they want to create a new America. So these people are putting in danger the fragile balance that has been so far, but has extremism is arriving in Montana, the resistance is growing also, which I find really interesting. So people are not giving up; they are even more. They resist even more, and they try to create new alliances.
And what sort of alliances did you see emerging in these resistance movements?
So there was a big alliance between the cowboys. So it was initiated by two women. One of them, she's a woman rancher. She raises sheep and goats, and she partnered with a Northern Cheyenne rancher, and together they led a coalition of cowboys, Northern Cheyenne, and Amish people who are also in the region, and they fought against a mining project, coal mining project, and also a project to build a railroad to the railroad would have crossed Native American cemeteries and was threatening to contaminate wells. And so they fought during 15 years, and they won.
Really?
Yeah,
They
because they just, created an alliances. And these people didn't used to talk to one another. But then they had this big victory, and they won against the second major corporation in the United States. I mean, in terms of mining.
That's incredible. I mean, that's incredible, especially when you hear of... When I read the news, I hear about so many losses in the environmental movement when they're trying to stop these large pipelines being built. So that's amazing to hear that victories are taking place.
So the two women who are leading the coalition say they told me against the power of love. You cannot do anything against the power of love, because they really deeply love the land, the environment. That's really part of their identity, and nobody can touch that. So that's how they managed to get an agreement within themselves.
And Sylvie, you said earlier that when it was brought to your attention that you should turn this into a book, you said that you didn't quite know what the book was going to be about or what you were writing about, and that suddenly you discovered what that was. What was it? What do you think is the heart of this book? What's the question that's motivating it?
It took me a while, like 6 years, to write it, because whenever I was going to Montana, I had to handle so many emotions that I had to find the right channel to communicate these emotions. And I wanted the book to be a different take on America. And I wanted the book to be about people who are solution makers and people we could be inspired by, and people who give us, who are non-Americans, hopes in America. And I found these people, and all the people I wrote about and all the people I met have such a strong sense of solidarity, inspired by the values of the earth. And I really want all my work from South America to Burma to North America is about promoting what relates all of us and how we relate it also to the environment. And when you hear these people's stories, you feel really a relationship with them.
And so you said in your preliminary researches before moving to Montana that you were seeking to discover the soul of America, the heart of America. Do you think that you found it?
Well, I think these people I met, they are the faces of America, and through their eyes, I can feel the soul of America. I'm not saying they're exclusively the soul of America, but to me, they're the spirit of America, but a spirit I really like, I really love, I really fell in love with. And that's that kind of soul of America I wanted to share.
And that spirit is the spirit of solidarity, resilience, love. Yes, connection to the earth. Yeah. And so we've been talking about these different perspectives, these different narratives on American identity, American history, and there's one more that we haven't talked about yet, which is the French perspective, which is the perspective that you offer, and you've inherited a lineage of French authors, intellectuals coming to America and writing about what they see there. You've famously and frequently compared to de Tocqueville. How do you respond to this legacy of French perspectives on American culture? And how would you explain the French fascination with America?
Well, I think the fascination or the attraction is in my genes because my parents transmitted that passion.
Well, where did they get it?
To me.
Are French people just born with this? That's the real question.
I think my parents were born. We're all from the south of France, and they were born. I was born in a family that has always been deeply connected to the land. On my mom and dad's sides, everybody except my parents, they were all winemakers. So that's where the connection to the land come from. And they also spoke Occitan. So they've always been attracted by my parents, at least big landscapes. And when they were watching Western, they were always on the side of Native Americans. And so I think that passion for the land, big landscape, and my sensitivity to human rights obviously led me to places in America where there are many Native American people. And I think the French love Americans. I mean, it's always been a love and hate relationship. Sometimes we pretend we don't like Americans, but we're really attracted by America anyway. And in my case, it's always been the West, but I mean, I love the East Coast too, but I feel comfortable in the West.
And do you embrace this comparison to de Tocqueville, or do you think that you're offering a perspective that he wasn't, in his turn, able to capture?
I think we're both French, and that's basically our only common ground. Because, I mean, I read his work and I'm interested in his work, but it's a totally different time, of course. And then when I go to the West, I always live with people, and I spend years trying to I don't try to understand. I just try to experiment emotions and to write about the emotions that encounters come.
Your work is based on contact and touch and being surrounded by the community.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to get a political analysis, although in the book I have some political points of view, anthropological point of view, economic point of view, but it's not a philosophy essay. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can we have a final round of applause for Sylvie, please?
Thank you.
We have time now for some audience questions. I see Fred is ready and eager, so we'll start with you, and then if anyone else has questions as well, feel free to raise your hand, and Morgan will bring you the microphone.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting discussion. I would like to focus on one aspect of what you said and compare it to something else which I've read about Louisiana, which was similar but different. So you mentioned also both the political diversity of Montana, that it's a purple or even red state, yet also you talk about the strong sense of the land and the environment. But in the United States, as you know, somehow if you're Republican, you have to deny that the problems with the climate are really problems with the climate. And I actually read recently, a few years ago, a book about the Republican community, again, a community but not Native American, but farmers in Louisiana that were really attached to the land, and they saw that industry was destroying their environment, but they still stayed loyal to evangelical Christians and Republicans who just continue to support industry and pollution and destroying the environment. And they resolved the conflict by saying, well, evangelicalism is more important than the environment. Okay, so the situation is not the same, but how do the two opposing, I use the word opposing, maybe they're not, values of the Republican Party, which is somehow environmentalism is not really a problem, reconcile to what you've just been talking about? Is there a contradiction or not, and how does that work itself out?
To be honest, I didn't really dig into that. I don't know the situation about Louisiana, and to be to make it clear, because maybe I wasn't clear about it, but there's not that much of a political diversity in Montana. They're mostly Republicans. I mean, when you see, the last election was like really red. And but what I was trying to say is that despite political oppositions, the people who have been living there for a while don't see it as a problem to work hand in hand with people who don't share the same view when it deals to protect the land they live on. But I don't have I don't have a broader view about the whole America. Yeah.
Because Montana, how does that conflict between republicanism, which is against environmentalism, and a very strong environmentalism?
Yeah.
Just in Montana.
Yeah. Well, the land, yeah, I don't know how else to answer. Oh, yeah. Well, actually, yeah. Private property, yeah. No. Well, the gun culture is all over the West, and in Montana they have. Sorry. No, but ecologists have guns too. Yeah, they say they're hunters, so they have guns. Are you from Montana?
Other questions?
Yeah, I have just a question also on the bringing back the buffalo successfully to Montana and bringing back a strain that was genetically pure, and how they managed to do that in spite of opposition from farmers who didn't want free-range buffalo anywhere near their farms. So that's another. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how the grassroots managed to handle that opposition?
Yeah. Let me say, at one point in history, historians say there might have been between 30 million to 50 million bisons or buffalo all over from Alaska to Mexico. At the end of the 19th century, there were barely 100, and there were a dozen of them in Yellowstone National Park. And when people who were really concerned about the landscape and fauna and flora realized that they were going to disappear, they created, and one of them was Theodore Roosevelt, they created the American Bison Society. And since then, they've been working on bringing back the buffalo. And now in Yellowstone National Park, there are about 6,000 bison. And what they do is that because there's a strong opposition, as you said, from ranchers, because we're in a cattle ranching culture there, and the opposition by ranchers is, their main concern is that they say that bison carry brucellosis. And brucellosis, as some of you might know, make the cows abort. So some of Yellowstone National Park bison have brucellosis, but they are being watched over by the ranchers, and they have a program in Yellowstone that bison have to go through phase 1 and phase 2 to make sure they're brucellosis free. Once they're brucellosis free, they're sent to Fort Peck, which is an Indian reservation east of Montana. And then in Fort Peck, they go through phase 3 of the testing. And if they're still free from brucellosis at stage 3, the bisons are being sent to different Native American populations all over. So the opposition is mainly for brucellosis, but it's also once again competing for the land, because bison in the US, they are not recognized officially as a wild animal. Because if they were recognized as a wild animal, they could be at some point on the endangered list.
When you say a white animal, what do you mean?
Wild.
Wild, excuse me.
Sorry. No, some of them are white, but they're wild. Yeah.
And so you saw that firsthand when you were in Montana, these efforts?
Yeah, I spent time with the rangers in Yellowstone National Park, and I've started working on a podcast last summer about bison, and how much is it part of the national identity? Because you know that since 2016, it's one of the national symbol with the bald eagle. Yeah.
Was bison. We have time for one more question.
Since your family is from the southern part of France, and now you've been to Crow Fair, I'm wondering which do you think would be scarier, to get into the ring in like a course canadaise with the bullfights the way they're done in the south of France, or the relay races that you saw at Crow Fair?
I love Indian relay, and I think Indian relay. It's people. The race is without a, how do you say, saddle? You know,
Saddle?
it's without a saddle, and they really speed up. I mean they're really champions, and the Blackfeet, the Crows, the Kiowa, they all. I mean it's getting big, and it's bringing back some pride into the tribes because nobody else can do it. I mean they're really so. I'm not scared about Indian relay. I wouldn't do it for sure. I'm not skilled, I barely know how to ride a horse. I mean, I had to learn going with the Blackfeet, but yeah. Well, probably the corrida would be scarier, but I enjoy Indian relay much more. Thank you very much.